Hello, welcome back. I am Dr. Vernita Glenn-White. I go by Dr. V, and I am a strategic transformational coach. And what I love to do is really help high achieving, ambitious people embrace their brilliance. And we do that by breaking their personal glass ceiling so they can show up more powerful and empowered in their personal life and in their careers. I believe that this is important, and why I wanted to start doing this work is because a lot of us who are high achievers, highly ambitious people, we know how to make things happen in our professional lives, but then we all plateau for some reason. And a lot of times we think it's because people are holding us back or the system is holding us back. But truth be told, it's us, our personal lives, that are holding us back, because we can only go so far professionally that our personal lives will take us. So we have to continue to grow in all areas of our lives, especially personally, if we want to get to that next level professionally. And I know that from personal experience, I accomplished so many great things in my life, but I found myself being stuck. And you hear that a lot, like, why am I stuck? And I'll get into this like later on, but stuck usually means that your time is up where you are and it's time for you to transition, or it means that you're not giving your all like you are supposed to be doing. So that's really what stuck is. So my job is to figure out what's underneath all of that that's keeping you in your comfort zone, and to why you don't want to stretch and move. Well, I don't want to say don't want to. A lot of times when we see something that triggers us, we get this tug and this pull for something more, but then there's something that, holds us by the ankle for us to go to that next level. So my job is to, one, get you to look down to realize something is holding your ankle, and then cut the shackles off of that so you can go to your next level. So I've been doing this series. My movement is Embracing Brilliance, and it started with the foundation of my book, Embracing Grit for Greatness, Becoming Professionally Powerful Through Personal Empowerment. And I go through and I share my story just like you have a story. But what I also do in here is tell you like some of the exact exercises and things that I did to overcome and go to my new level. And it really started with my own personal journey. Yes, I know a lot of us like to study a lot of things that are outside of us because it's easier to manage than studying ourselves. But I promise you, you will never, ever get to where you want to go if you don't first turn inward. So I've been talking about embracing brilliance. We talked about embracing brilliant honesty. We talked about embracing a new brilliant reality. We talked about several other things, and today we're going to talk about embracing a brilliant conversation. Yes, conversations. There's the industry of communication is a huge one, multi-billion-dollar industry on helping people learn how to communicate better, whether that's communicate better as a leader, as a parent or a guardian, as a student, as a woman, as a man, anything. People want to learn how to communicate, because communication, that helps us build the relationships, and we can't get anywhere we want to go without relationship building. No one is an island. You haven't gotten to where you are now, even if you are successful by yourself. And while the journey to success can be lonely, I'm sure you've had some conversations with people along the way to keep you, on the right track. But on the other side of that, conversations can really hold us back, or the lack thereof. A lack of conversations can really hold us back. And if you're like me, analytical, you stay up here in your head a lot, you constantly replay things over and over to kind of see like, what could I have done differently? What could I have said differently to make the situation, go better, or whatever the case may be? And I had to learn to stop doing that, right? Yes, reflection is good, but sometimes when we reflect too much, we find ourselves in this rabbit hole of negative thoughts and blaming ourselves and reliving shame and regret and all of that. And we don't want to do that. So if you are like me, one thing to do is, reflect a little bit and then move on. Now, communication is a two-way street. Yes, it is better if you are talking with someone so that both of you can have a clear understanding and set the ground rules of whatever you do, whether that's personally or professionally. But then there are some times when you may not have the opportunity to have the conversation with the other person. Yes, I know it sounds strange, but sometimes you may be further along a growth journey than someone else. So you have to take the initiative, because remember, we can only control ourselves. As much as some of us want to control others, you know, we can only control ourselves. So when I discovered this exercise with my own personal development coach, I went away to a retreat and really had to get my life together. We did this exercise and it was powerful. And at first I was like, I don't want to do this because the person I need to say all of this to isn't here. So what we had to do was do this with complete strangers. Well, I mean, they weren't like fully complete strangers because we had spent some time together at this point, but they were strangers in this as it relates to the situation. Like they didn't know anything about the situation, and I found it to be so freeing. And I'm going to actually walk you through this. This one will maybe a little short video because I really want to give you some tools to really start having brilliant conversations, whether that's with yourself. And I say with yourself because like I said, I process a lot by myself, but sometimes we get, processing without tools or strategies can, like I say, get you back into that place of blame, shame, regret, and guilt, and all of that. And that's not what we want to do. Let me back up. When I was in K-12, I was a K-12 educator, and I also did this with my college students. And I got this from like my friends in the English or language arts department, was to start with sentence stems. And it sounds elementary and childish, but sentence stems work. Just like if you ever worked with sales, or if you ever had salespeople call you, for the most part, they're following a script, with stems, and they're filling in like your information, your name or whatever, but they're following a script. And what that does is keep them on task. It keeps, all of the extra emotions out of it. And it makes sure that everyone is uniformed and have a clear direction of where the company wants to go or what they want to achieve. In school, when we use sentence stems, they were great conversation starters for students to engage in discussions, because you don't just tell students, or even I did this in workshops with adults as well, you don't just tell people to turn and talk, and then some may talk about the topic at hand for a little bit, but then they'll start talking about any and everything else. And then you'll have some people that just won't talk at all, because it's like, well, are you gonna start? No, you start, things like that. So with the sentence stems, it really encouraged people. One, it was a safe space, and two, it helped them to like put everyone on the level playing field, because everyone had the sentence stem. They didn't have to think too much. They didn't have to let their guard down too much, because we had already set the parameters of this is what you're going to talk about. So sentence stems are very powerful. I use it in mathematics. I used it in workshops when I was talking about racism. I used it when I was helping leaders with their communication and their leadership styles. And then I didn't even think of this, but it was being used on me at this retreat, for personal growth and transformational work. So I'm going to go through them. And like I said, if you do this by yourself with the person in mind, that's a good way to kind of break the ice with yourself. A lot of times we hold ourselves hostage, and that's what I was talking about, those personal glass ceilings. A lot of time we hold ourselves hostage and the other person is gone about their business, right? But sometimes we just feel like we need to say something, and we hold it in because we are waiting to cross paths with the other person. And sometimes that may never happen, and we have to be okay with that. What I also love about these sentence stems is that it works for your personal life and your professional life. And I realized as I was going through my transformational journey, well, I'm still on it. I'm still doing self-discovery and, working as a transformational coach. A lot of these exercises are geared towards like our personal life, like something with relationships, our family, our loved ones, our significant others, our spouse, whatever the case may be. But this also can work, these tools can work in our professional lives with our co-workers, our supervisors, managers, or even, depending on the size of the company, the boss or the executive. And I like to keep both of those areas. And again, there are more than just two areas of our lives, but it's more people understand life and career or personal and professional. They understand it in those two areas. But I'm bringing attention to these two areas because sometimes we can be so professionally focused that our personal lives drop, or vice versa. We can be so much into like our self-help, our, understanding ourselves, our own journeys, where we show back up at work and people are like, who is this person? And we forget that they didn't come along the journey with us, and now we're acting brand new, and they're like, but you still have a job to do, right? So we want to make sure that we keep both of those in harmony and work on both at the same time. But I will suggest like your personal should be higher, because the more you work on yourself personally, the higher you can go professionally. And that's whether you're working for someone else or you're working for yourself. All right. So let's get ready. I wrote about this in my book. Let me see. I'll go through the actual sentence stems, and then I'll share the modified version I did that I had to do myself. So I do this with my students. Whatever exercise or math problem or conversation starter I wanted my students to do, or my attendees or my clients to do, I would always go first. I would always demonstrate, because one, I wanted to make sure that they understood that this was a safe place. I wanted to have skin in the game, so I can be like, no, I know what you're going through as you go through this process. And then that also built trust with my students or participants or clients. I will say this. I learned these three, kind of guidelines or guiding posts or things to set the tone. And you can use this, it's gonna sound silly, but I'm gonna say use it with yourself. And then anytime you want to have one of these in-depth conversations, use it with the other person as well. So one is unconditional love. So the person knows that no matter what happens, there's still love. So there's a safe place for you to share, because if we're not having honest conversations, then the point of all of this is null and void. So unconditional love, no repercussions. So this was a big one for me. So no repercussions, meaning that regardless of what the person says, or even if you're having this conversation with yourself, and usually when you're with yourself, you're writing things out, whatever comes out, comes up and comes out, and you don't get to do like love takeaway from the person, or you don't get to beat yourself up, or you don't get to be angry and jump at the person, or angry and jump on yourself for whatever comes up, because in order for you to break those personal glass ceilings, you have to expose the glass ceiling. So things have to come up. So that was unconditional love, no repercussions, and no judgment. And no judgment, meaning that you can't secretly hold something that someone says and then bring it up in a later conversation, or you can't hold anything against them if they were, whatever they say, you can't judge them for what they're saying, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Like, you don't get to judge. You may have a thought, but you need to shut that thought down, because you don't want to shut down the other person. The same with yourself. And this is the interesting thing, because things about personal development work, and this is why you also it's recommended for you to have a coach who understands these things, because yes, we can read self-help books, we can do exercises on our own, but we need someone to hold us accountable, because we're brilliant people and we know how to stop just enough, or just right there at that point, to keep us from going, breaking through, because it's uncomfortable. So having a coach guiding you along make sure that you get to the results that you desire. All right, so I talked enough, so here we go. And these sentence stems, some people call them like the total truth process, or radical truth, radical honesty. It's been called by several different names by psychologists, other coaches, and things like that. But I'm realizing everyone doesn't know this, right? So I'm going to read all of them, but you don't have to use every single sentence stem. There are, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 overarching areas. And then under each area, I'll read like 2 sentence stems, and then you can change them, but don't change the overarching theme of the sentence stem. And again, you can do this with yourself. Start with something light, and then you can do this with another person. And if you choose to do this with another person, set those ground rules that I talked about, and then start with something light as well. Now, here's the thing. If the person isn't familiar with this, and then you show up talking about, I want to do some sentence stems, give them the grace of looking at you kind of weird and strange, because we don't talk in sentence stems every day. This is not a normal conversation. If you are talking with other people who've been doing deep dive work, it is normal. But for the majority of the people, we don't go around talking in sentence stems. So just kind of let them know what's going to happen. Don't spring it on them, but just ask them for grace and ease for you to go through the process. And if they don't reciprocate, or if they look at you strangely, then receive that, because it'll take some time to get used to. All right, so the first category is anger. And we know about anger, right? So something happens and you go through this entire process. This is why it's called the process. You don't just get to start at one thing and then stop. You have to go all the way to the end, because you want to have those brilliant conversations. You want to embrace those conversations so that you can clear the air and go on to something else, right? A lot of times we get to conversations, we may argue with someone or have disagreements, but nothing ever gets resolved. And then when something else comes up, whether that's at home, with friends, in the organization, at your job, in your business, it triggers you, and then you find yourself back in the same cycle. And we don't want that to happen for you, because if you keep going in a cycle, then you never go to your next level. So I talked about this on one of my other Facebook Lives, a couple weeks ago, is that we're never done learning. So let's say you do this total truth process, and let's say you did it with a family member, and you're like, okay, me and that family member, we're really good, we're back close, and everything's good. And then let's say you go to work, and then there's a situation with a colleague, and then it's like, man, do I need to go through this all over again? Yes, because there are different levels to different things. And just like you go to school, you go to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and so forth, you're still learning like math, science, English, or whatever subject. You're still learning those core subjects, but it's just different levels. So that's how I want you to think about your transformation process and this total truth process. All right, here we go. So anger. So 2 sentence stems. You can say it with yourself, or you're talking with someone else. I am angry that you. Gather your thoughts together and be as clear and concise as you can be. Because a lot of times we're around here angry, mad, frustrated, all of this stuff, but we don't know why, or we don't articulate why to the other person or even ourselves, right? So I am angry that you, and I got really mad when. So I talked about this in one of the other videos about naming your feelings. You have to understand your feelings and be honest with your feelings in order to name them, right? So, so that's anger. After you move on to that, you can pause a little bit and then go to the next one. Hurt. My feelings were hurt when. I am really sad because. And I'm going to just throw in this third one, because this one is a big one, especially for women. I feel disappointed about. So again, sentence stems, you're not blaming the person. You notice that you're taking on responsibility about your feelings, because I've done this, and maybe you have too. I like to say, well, you should have, you did, you. But I don't, from my point of view, I don't say like, how I feel when something happens. So I hope that makes sense. I learned that in peer counseling, like in middle school. I was a peer counselor. You know what? maybe I was meant for this. But I remember being a peer counselor and going through this training and telling conflict resolution, telling people use I statements. And this is exactly what we're doing. Conflict resolution using I statements. So that was anger, then hurt, and then fear. Because these are feelings that are underlining. Sometimes we think we're only angry and hurt, but there are times when there is fear, and fear drives a lot of things that we say that causes breakdown in communication. So I'm afraid that, and name it, and I'm scared because I think. Whatever you're thinking, and this is the time to be honest, because these are your feelings, right? And then here's where it gets good. So we talked about anger, hurt, and fear. And now is responsibility and accountability. So yes, we want to, express how we feel based on what the other person may have said or done, or what we've said or done to ourselves, like any situations that we found ourselves in. But now it's time to take responsibility and accountability. So one says, I'm sorry that even if you think you are completely innocent in a situation, still find something. Whether it's, I'm sorry I didn't hear you when you said this. I'm sorry that maybe I brushed against your arm when you did this. And I'm laughing because sometimes things can be so minor, or I stepped on your toe. Whatever the case may be, find something that you can take responsibility and accountability for. And then it says, I didn't mean to, or I know my part was. Right? So again, anytime there's a breakdown in communication, it's a two-way street. Meaning that you did something, even though it may not have been, severe like what the other person did, but just find where you can take responsibility. If you're doing this with yourself, admit that you probably made a bad decision about something, and you're responsible because you were just doing, you thought you were doing the best you could with the information that you had at the time. So that's responsibility and accountability. Then the other part is understanding. Excuse me. Understanding. I understand that you and what I know is. So whatever the situation is, and this is easier when you have actual situations, but it's like I understand that you may have felt I did X, Y, and Z. I understand that you may have felt hurt or confused or angry. Whatever the situation is, as you go through this process, you'll know exactly, what to say as you're going through this. And then see, we may get to the accountability and the understanding part, but in order for us to be having, have brilliant conversations, we have to finish out this process because we need to close the conversations, right? So it says want. What I really want is, and be honest, do you really want to not stop talking? Do you really want to stop talking to that person? Do you want them to call you every other day? Do you want them to have certain emails sent to you by a certain day and a certain time? And being honest, because remember, the breakdown in communication was something that you truly wanted that didn't happen. You had an expectation that wasn't met, which caused the breakdown in communication. So this is your chance to express what you want, right? And then forgiveness, love, and appreciation. I forgive you for, or I appreciate you for. Excuse me. Sometimes if we're doing this with ourselves, we have to do a lot of forgiving for ourselves, a lot of forgiving. But then we also need to appreciate ourselves because we've been doing some things right. Everything isn't always wrong. We don't get to certain levels in our lives by being wrong all the time. We've done right things. So we want to appreciate and show ourselves some love. And then if you're doing this with another person, show them appreciation, forgiveness, and love. And I think that a lot of times a lot of communication breaks down because the other person doesn't feel appreciated, right? So if you're showing them that you do really appreciate them, now be sincere, that you truly appreciate them for something, go ahead and let them know, right? You've heard the phrase, give them their flowers while they're alive and things like that. You can find something to appreciate them for. And then agreements. I've never done this before. I probably had bits and pieces of this process, really never in this order, but what sealed it for me was the agreement. I agree to, or from now on, I will. The reason why you want to do agreements is because you're going back, finding the breakdown in the communication. You're being open and honest about what you want, what you desire, and all of those things. But now, so we don't have this same breakdown in communication again, we have to come to an agreement. So if you were at work and, one of your co-workers, y'all are on the team together, and, the breakdown was because they didn't send an email on time. And you've gone through all of this. You're a good worker. I appreciate that. I was really mad when, you go through everything like that. And then you forgive them for having turned in something late, and it's causing you to get all the backlash. But then here's the agreement. I agree to ask you for what I need 2 days in advance. Let's say something like that. Because you're trying to figure out, I don't want to be in this situation again. So what can we agree to make sure we don't deal with this anymore, right? So then the beauty about this is the other person gets to respond. Now, the whole time, how I've learned this, that the other person just sits and listens. You don't just shove it down their throat, but you just take your time, you pause, make sure that it's sinking in and process. And then when you get to this point, you get to ask them, is this something you can handle? Because you don't want to just give them demands and then they don't follow those demands, and then now you're in the breakdown all over again. So if you're saying, I agree, from now on, I will ask for you to send me whatever I need 2 days in advance. Or from now on, I will call you twice a week, to ask you how you're doing, whatever the case may be. The other person then gets to say either, yes, I can agree to that, or no, that does not work for me. And you want to leave people at choice, because now they feel empowered as well. So if you say, from now on, I will request whatever I need from you 2 days in advance, maybe they counter with, I'm going to need 3 days in advance. And if that's something that you can do, now don't be hard just to be hard. But if that's something that you can do, then you say, from now on, I will make sure I communicate or make a request to you at least 3 days in advance. And then they get to say, okay. And you want to be able to do that, because if you truly value the relationship and you want to move on, then you find common ground that both of you can stick to. Now, you repeat it back to them because, this is what you said. Now, if you hold up your end of the bargain and they don't, then, you have some choices to make, or you can go through this again, or you get to decide where you want to go with the relationship. As you're doing this with yourself, it can be a little tricky, but it's the same thing. I agree to not let myself sit in my, let's say, bad decisions for more than 5 minutes, and then time yourself, because you maybe been beating yourself up over something, over and over. So from now on, I will write out my thoughts before I say something to someone else, if you find yourself always flying off the handle and things like that. So let me recap. And again, I love the total truth process. Oh, I said I would read mine out of my book. I did a modified version of this, but I'll still read it to you, because I even wrote in my book, the entire process is more involved. However, I spend a lot of time working through these 4 emotions in multiple areas of my life. So it says, and this was about, what was this about? Oh, me, and the situation with my mother's house after she passed. So I said, I'm angry at the people who represented me during the foreclosure process of my mother's house. Because I used to say I lost my mother's house, but I had to, not say those words anymore, because then I was putting the blame on myself. It was like a situation happened and I no longer have my mother's house. So it says, I'm hurt that my mother's house was taken from me. I'm afraid of moving out of my grandmother's house because I couldn't keep my mother's house, and I thought that meant I would lose another property. I regretted not doing my due diligence in seeking legal and homeowners insurance advice. I forgive myself for the decisions I made leading to the foreclosure of my mother's house. I carried that weight for years about the situation with my mother's house. I was angry at myself. I was angry at other people, but I was more angry at myself. So I had to really go through all of those steps about how I was feeling. I had to take responsibility for my part. I had to admit that I was afraid, angry, hurt. And then I had to show myself some appreciation. And then what I really wanted, because my desire was to have my own home. And I realized what was happening to me in my personal life was blocking me from getting there because of those subconscious thoughts and beliefs that I had that I would lose another property. And then I had to make agreements with myself. It was like, no, we keep changing the conversation in our head every time it pops up, change the language in my words, and stop telling people that same old story. So I had to agree to myself not to do that. All right, so I hope that was very helpful for you to have these brilliant conversations. And I want you to promise me, do two of these. Do one, with yourself. Find something that, you've been holding yourself hostage for and go through this process. And then two, find someone maybe at work or maybe in your social circle, your or your family, to where you go through this. Find something light at first, and then have this conversation. And it's going to be weird. It's going to feel strange because, again, we don't talk in sentence stems, but sentence stems help guide a conversation, and they provide bumper rails for you so you don't get off task and off target and start blaming, and then everything blows up. All right. So again, to recap, in order to have brilliant conversations or embracing brilliant conversations, you want to start with anger and be honest. I'm angry that you, or I got really mad when. Then move on to hurt. My feelings were hurt when I feel disappointed about. Then fear. I'm afraid that. I'm scared because I think. Responsibility and accountability. I'm sorry that I know my part was, okay? Then moving on to understanding. I understand that you, and what I know is, and you don't have to use both of those, so I'm just giving you options. Wants. What I really want is, or I hope that. Then forgiveness, love, and appreciation. I forgive you for, I appreciate you for. And then agreements. I agree to, or from now on, I will. All right, so again, this is an entire process. You can use one stem, both stems, or come up with your own that fits in those big parameters so that you get through the entire process. Because the goal is to close the conversations and to move past this particular breakdown. You shouldn't keep having the same arguments or disagreements over the same thing over and over. That means you haven't completed whatever the issue was, right? So brilliant people, that's what we do. We finish things, close things, seal the deal, and then move on to the next. And then that frees you. And guess what? If the other person doesn't do their part, it frees you because you've left them at choice. I said this is what was going on. I laid it all out for you, and it is what it is, right? You've done your part, and that's what brilliant people do. Take responsibility, do your part, and then move on. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts about this, and if you tried this, let me know. If you've done it with yourself, I also want to know that as well. So I am Dr. V. Thank you so much for listening and learning with me. And remember to be bold, be empowered, be well, and be brilliant. So until next time, bye.